Hello and welcome to a new episode of the Cradle News Roundup, your one-stop shop for all news West Asia. My name is Esteban Carrillo. I am the head of news for the Cradle. As usual, I'm joined by my colleagues, content creator and writer for the Cradle, Karim Shami, and columnist and editor for the Cradle, Sharmin Narwani. And before we get started, I want to thank you for making this channel what it is, for liking, for sharing, for subscribing. And I also want to direct you to our Patreon page where you can become supporters of the Cradle. And in the near future, you will get access to exclusive content. So today we need to start in Lebanon, where things seem about ready to boil over. Then again, that kind of has been the case for a while now, right? But over the past couple of days, there was a massacre in the occupied Syrian Golan Heights that the Israeli government blamed on Hezbollah. Hezbollah denied this, and some of the evidence that has been shared seems to point to this being an Iron Dome interceptor that went awry. As we have seen before, like the Iron Dome, over recent months, we have seen time and again that these interceptors are not as reliable as Israel would like you to believe. And one of these missiles apparently hit a football game, if I'm not mistaken. It killed. It caused a massacre. Right, 10 children, a total of 12 civilians killed in the occupied Syrian Golan Heights in the town of Mashat al-Shams. And now Israel is promising a strong response, right? They're saying we need to hurt Hezbollah, we need to hit something, this is just going to escalate more. And Hezbollah is saying, if you come and hit Beirut, because that's what's being implied, right? If you Google search right now for reports on this situation, almost all of the pictures are of Beirut airport, right? They talk about escalating tensions and then they put a picture of Beirut airport. And we know already that Western media likes to manipulate stories to threaten Beirut International Airport. We still haven't seen the response from Israel. Well, I don't know if we should call this a response, honestly, right? Like to them, it would be a response. To Hezbollah, it would just be a provocation because this likely could have even been just a false flag attack to allow them to escalate this war. You have reports saying that the U.S. is telling them to not hit Beirut, because if you hit Beirut, all hell is going to break loose. But Israel, as Israel is wont to do, we really cannot predict what comes next. So, where are we right now with this?
It's interesting. I think the Cradle reported on this too, that while Netanyahu, in the early days of his visit to Washington, that there were reports that the administration of Joe Biden had greenlit expanded Israeli attacks on Lebanon. And this is before the incident on Saturday in the Golan Heights. So it's almost like, when you say false flag, it's probably something that happened and was unintended, but, it's about monopolizing.
It's
about taking advantage, being opportunistic about the next event and raising the temperature on that to allow Israel the justification for an escalation on Lebanon. As you mentioned, these interceptors have fallen. It's not just in this case. In wars all over the place, in Ukraine and in other theaters, interceptors have fallen on civilian areas. And there have been a number of instances where Israeli interceptors have fallen on Israeli towns. I think last November, a Tamir missile, an Israeli Tamir air defense missile, struck a hospital in Tel Aviv. The following month, there was a crash of an Iron Dome interceptor, again in Tel Aviv. And then just as recently as a few days ago, there was a fire caused by an Israeli interceptor in occupied Galilee, following the interception of a Hezbollah drone. So these things are, part and parcel of the daily clashes that take place between the Israeli military and the Lebanese resistance. I think what's also notable is, now we have, over the weekend and into today, we have a number of videos circulating by civilians and residents of the Golan Heights who are Syrian Druze, by and large, and stay loyal to Syria, and have done so since 1967 when they were occupied by the Israeli military. in this case, all the civilians killed were Syrian Druze. They were the ones killed, and they are the witnesses of what happened too. And so we have seen now a video of what looks like an Israeli interceptor that was shot down. That fell on the football field. But, more importantly, we're getting witnesses saying that the incident took place just seconds after Israeli sirens were sounded, which makes it even more likely that it was an intercepting missile. But, here's what's interesting. Within no time, an Israeli army team came and removed all signs of the projectile and the shrapnel that remained in the area. According to one Druze witness who was videos gone viral on social media today. And what tends to happen in these cases is people immediately go to the site of destruction and start videotaping it and photographing it. We have no pictures, no imagery of that. The only imagery we have of the alleged projectile is an Israeli released one that has wiped out the background, so there are no background scenes. You just see bits of an actual piece of artillery, and with nothing. There's no context whatsoever. So these all indicate that Israel is trying to hide something. You're right as well. Hezbollah categorically denied the incident. It did concede that it did target in a Golan, an Israeli barracks. Okay, so a military target in the Golan.
They've been hitting the Golan for a while.
Yeah, they have been with the Falak 1 rocket, but the timing of this incident is different. The Falak missile attack happened before this incident. This incident happened just moments after Israeli sirens went off, and this was not the Hezbollah target. Hezbollah also did something a bit unusual in that it came out and issued a denial. It even made a statement to the United Nations to make clear that this was not a Hezbollah incident. Just in the past, Hezbollah has, when it has on occasion, like in the 2006 war, accidentally killed civilians, it has admitted to it immediately and apologized for doing so. It hasn't hidden this information. And let's not forget, Israel has killed over 100 Lebanese civilians in clashes since October 8th already.
In the war, yeah.
And on social media, they're like, Hezbollah's killed. This was like October 7th revisited. Hezbollah has killed children. What about 15,000 Gazan children killed by Israel?
Horrific. Haaretz earlier they had this headline, how do you eulogize 12 children? Of course, the loss of 12 children cannot be imaginable. But how can Israeli media be talking about eulogizing children when they have the blood of 15,000 children? As you said, but Karim, I want to ask you something, right? Because many questions remain, obviously, as Sharmeen just pointed out. But I think the biggest one really is the damage caused, right? And not just the damage. There's questions about the trajectory of the missile. There's questions about the sound it caused. That, Israel wants you to believe, this is Hezbollah, right? Because Hezbollah is evil and represents everything bad in the world. But then the evidence seems to point, again, to the interceptors.
Yes, Karim, please mansplain it to us.
First, we can see videos that were released by Hezbollah of them firing Falak missile, and we can see the damage and the
crater.
The crater, they do after they hit their targets, unlike what we saw in Majd al-Shams. And also we have to know that Iron Dome interceptor and any interceptor that is used by the US or the West or anybody, usually before it hits its targets, it shatters and it creates these small projectiles.
Like small fireworks, kind of.
Yeah, that's how we see it. But what's actually happening is that this missile, it explodes to small pieces because this will increase the probability of it hitting projectiles in the area. And for instance, if a missile is coming and this is the Iron Dome usually explodes here, and some of the pieces that explodes targets or hits an airplane or a missile. That's how it's usually done. So if we look at the few images and the few videos that we have, we can see that there is small holes in the walls and little to no damage on the ground. That means that it's not a missile that's fired by Hezbollah, usually because when they fire missiles to bases, they fire missiles that make a big crater and that exerts fire all over the north, as we saw in the last month. But this missile had like very, very small crater, or there's no craters, but there's holes in the walls. That indicates, at least for my information, that this is an interceptor that was that exploded before it reached the ground, or it exploded the moment it reached the ground. And because there's people, of course, they are playing football, as they said, so people that are standing and the projectile exploded, then anybody who's standing around it will eventually die.
I mean, it's the question also of like the interceptor missiles carry a much smaller load of explosives than the Falak. Right, the Falak would have left a much bigger hole.
Yeah, and also you talked about the sound. So when Falak missile or rocket is fired from Hezbollah, that it takes is as such. It is fired upwards and then reaches a certain point, and then it goes downwards, accelerates using the power of gravity or by using gravity. While the interceptors, they are not like this. Usually the interceptors go up and they have their own engine. Yeah, the engine is not used at the moment they are fired as the Falak or other rockets that are used by Hezbollah. They have their own engine that leads them to the missile or the airplane that they want to intercept. So that's why when you hear the sound in the video, which is only one video that we have, we can hear the sound of the missile. It's not a constant sound, because if you're firing a projectile that's coming down, unfortunately in Lebanon we know how they sound because we experienced many wars with Israel. So it's clear from the trained ear that this is a missile that has an engine going on. It's not a projectile just falling from the sky.
It's very interesting.
And also there's eyewitnesses, as Shamin said. He was clear when he said that the projectile came from the mountain where usually Iron Dome and the Syrians come.
Like the people know where they are.
Yeah, of course. And there's a video, and there's also a video that we are seeing right now. It was captured on March. It's nearly the same location. We can see from where the interceptors come.
And I think also worth mentioning is the reception that the Israeli officials got in Masjid al-Shams. Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich got run out of town, called a murderer, a fascist, etc., because, this is the Syrian population of the Golan Heights, right? These are the fact that you have an Israeli official coming to make a circus out of your losses. When has Israel shown concern for Syrian civilians, right? This is a first.
And Israelis holding up pictures of the children who were killed in Masjid al-Shams as though they care. As though they care at all.
Exactly.
And when the army spokesman was speaking on, I think, Channel 12, he said it's a tragedy. The host inside the city said, but these are not Israelis.
שבה אזרחי מדינת ישראל ממג'דל שמס, קהילה, עדה דרוזית. הם לא אזרחי מדינת ישראל. אנחנו מחבקים אותם.
Not going to be a strategy, but as well, let's pull back again a bit. Just where is this going to lead? Because now Lebanon is starting to feel a bit the pinch, right? It's the fact that you have multiple airlines now either canceling or delaying flights. As I said, Beirut Airport is the one place that they keep wanting you to think of, right? When you think about an Israeli response.
So far, we've had German, Swiss, and Austrian airlines cancel flights, at least for the next 2 days. Mm-hmm. But, this could extend depending on if the temperature rises in the region. MEA, also Middle East Airlines, which is the Lebanese state airline, it has canceled half of the incoming aircraft because it obviously, if Beirut Airport's a target, they don't want a lot of aircraft just sitting there as targets. Potential targets. The U.S. Embassy and I'm sure other embassies also issued travel advisories.
Germany already told citizens, get out of Lebanon.
Yeah, a number of countries have done that. But last night, if you're in Beirut, you were expecting a strike imminently, during the night. I know someone I spoke with this morning who said he and his family, said at midnight, they were like, okay, it's going to happen now. At 1 a.m., no, it's going to happen now. Eventually, they went to sleep, and it hasn't happened yet.
I mean, in the south, it has. In the city of Tyre, in Lake David.
Yeah.
I think that...
Don't forget, this was according to the Israeli cabinet meeting, the war meeting they had on this, was going to be a qualitatively different kind of strike. They caveated it to suggest that it would not be enough to set off a full-on war, but enough to make a point. Now, the U.S. media and its proxies in this region went with the Israeli statements. I mean, into month 10 of this war, when we have revealed lie after lie after lie by the Israelis, they go with the statement. The White House, the National Security Council spokesperson came out and said this was a Hezbollah hit, and everyone quoted that. With all the witnesses say it was not. And I'm wondering that as the hours tick by, and it becomes more and more evident that it was not a Hezbollah projectile, it was in fact an Iron Dome intercepting missile that fell on people's heads. I'm wondering then if Israel will be able to execute on its threat,
So I think this feels almost like something that we already saw, right? When the Iranians launched their giant attack against Israel, and then there was, of course, the immediate threat. And then we saw the reaction, which was, we're still wondering what it was exactly. Israel has no way to regain deterrence, right? They're desperate to regain deterrence. Every statement, everything they say, the fact that Western media goes out and writes these horrific headlines, or the fact that the White House comes out and doesn't even bring up any questions about, this thing that is really still a big question mark. It's just Israel trying to regain deterrence. But if they even try to regain deterrence against Lebanon, Hezbollah has said it very clearly. We are going to strike deep into Israel.
When you strike an adversary, you don't know exactly what's going to happen, what the outcome is. If you hit a target that you thought was military and in fact turns out to be civilian and a highly, emotional target for populations, you don't know the series of events that you can trigger from any strike. So, what are Israel's new expanded target banks in this operation? Of course, many people are worried that it'll hit Beirut. I don't know why they would do that, because Israel is then targeting civilian populations, and it just adds to the accumulation of perceived and actual war crimes and crimes against humanity that are stacking up against Israel internationally. So, be very interesting to see. I mean, Israel has studied Hezbollah. Hezbollah is its northern neighbor. They share a border. Both are small countries. Eyes and ears are available to, to surveil all parts of this country with Israeli, advanced drone and satellite surveillance and reconnaissance technology. The fact that they still don't know where Hezbollah keeps its weapons,
exactly,
and where it launches from, where it manufactures now missiles on a daily basis, it'll be a huge mistake for Israel. It can hit the wrong target, and it will trigger a series of events. Now, Israel, in its cabinet meeting after it announced its decision to strike Lebanon in a qualitatively different way, did say that it means to strike in a very precise and targeted way, but that it anticipates in reaction at least a few days of high intensity clashes, military clashes with Hezbollah, because they know Hezbollah will retaliate in kind and probably expand their target banks within Israel, or qualitatively, hit more important targets.
So I think this brings us, to the big question, or well, actually, no, the other big question currently, because they talk about a few days fighting, right? I saw this same report. They're talking about, maybe we want to fight with them for like a week or something. How do you de-escalate, right? Especially since, again, you have reports of Israel sabotaging ceasefire talks, of Israel just continuing to block any attempt at a Gaza ceasefire, with the latest being that the Israeli negotiators don't even expect the latest version of their deal to reach the hands of Hamas. Because of the changes made, they expected the mediators to read this and be like, we can't show this to Hamas, come on.
Yeah.
You know, it's they are solidifying their, the Netanyahu's, these four things that he wants, which include the Palestinian return to the north, which includes, what was the other things?
He wanted to check everybody who was returning to his house.
So apparently this is in particular the one that they added to the one, to this proposal, and that it says, a system. They call it an independent system to check Palestinians returning to the north. This is not going to fly, apparently, according to the Israelis themselves.
Let's mention a Cradle article last week where we quoted two top Israeli officials who refused to travel to Qatar for talks with Hamas regarding a ceasefire. This comes in advance of the recent revelation that Israel has changed the ceasefire deal so much that it's likely mediators will not show the deal to Hamas. These two officials were head of the Prisoners and Missing Persons Administration and the head of the Shin Bet. Okay, and the only person who showed up was the Mossad chief at the meeting. Both officials say that there is no point. There's no point in traveling, and question Netanyahu's logic. Saying that he thinks, quote, he thinks that if he hardens positions, Hamas will break, but he's taking a dangerous bet on the lives of the hostages. They also say Netanyahu is single-minded and his position does not allow for negotiations to begin. They even said it's not clear if he wants a deal. And this is to your point about, how if there are further clashes, worsening clashes between Israel and Hezbollah for a few days or a week, how can they wind down from this? It's not clear that Netanyahu wants to.
Correct.
He stays in his position as long as the war goes on. There is a very easy way to de-escalate and completely shut down conflict, and that is a ceasefire deal. It's been made clear by Hamas and Palestinian resistance. It's been made clear by the Lebanese resistance, Hezbollah. It's been made clear by the Yemeni resistance, Ansar Allah. Every element of the resistance axis has said, do a ceasefire deal, stop the carnage in Gaza, and we will stop our military operations. And yet Netanyahu keeps spinning the wheels on the ceasefire deal, changing the terms that have, they've already spent 6, 7, 8 months trying to negotiate, and it becomes clear. Of course, the Israelis always attempt to make out that Hamas is the deal spoiler. It's become so clear that it is the Israelis, Netanyahu, and his cabinet in particular, who just do not want a ceasefire. He, of course, has pressure from his extremist settler ministers who absolutely will quit the coalition and bring down his government if the bombing of Gaza stops.
Exactly, so it also comes right after Netanyahu returned from the U.S., right? He returned over the weekend. He was there for about a week. He met with all the top leaders. He, hung out with Elon Musk. He went to the U.S. Capitol, got dozens of standing ovations, repeating lies, right? He repeated the Hamas rape. He repeated the beheaded babies. He repeated the, children in the oven. And people, the Congress people, getting up and clapping like seals, nonstop.
Yeah, well, the Cradle listened very carefully to the speech. And this is what we saw and heard. Congress clapping for Netanyahu 81 times. Okay, that is a sum total of 24.2 minutes, or if you want to get detailed, 1,453 seconds. Okay, 58 minutes long, which means 42% of the speech was just the seals clapping. Okay, he mentioned Iran 25 times. 25 times he had to bring Iran into a speech where almost half of it was interrupted by clapping.
Iran's axis of terror that Iran is funding, and Iran understands Iran is virtually beyond Iran's maniacal plans. Iran sees America. Iran's regime has been fighting America. Iran's terrorist proxies standing in Iran's way for Iran. So when Israel fights Hamas, we're fighting Iran. When we fight Hezbollah, we're fighting Iran. When we fight the Houthis, we're fighting Iran. And when we fight Iran, to prevent Iran, to Iran's axis of terror, to confronting Iran's aggression.
He just had to keep invoking Iran, at which Congress clapped like seals again for him. Roughly, by the way, the things that were not mentioned were that roughly half of elected Democratic officials were present only. It looked like a packed house, but there were over 100 members of the House of Representatives that were present and 28 Democratic senators, which means that around half of both caucuses in both houses were absent, okay? This included Democratic powerhouses like Kamala Harris, the Vice President of the United States, and Nancy Pelosi, former Speaker of the House. But instead, filling the seats.
You keep placing the blame of the anti-genocide protests on Iran. The blame, right, in quotation, of the resistance axis fighting Israel to oppose a genocide on Iran. What you're saying is Iran is against genocide. Like Yemen, like Hezbollah, like Iraqi resistance factions, and like U.S. university students and everyone who went out to protest that day on Capitol Hill and burn a Netanyahu effigy.
Yeah, Netanyahu continues to plug for Iran. Iran, therefore, being the only or the leading state, okay, to fight the genocide, to fight the live stream genocide that we're all seeing. He's constantly reminding us that Iran is the head of his snake, but this is a beautiful snake. You know, it is spearheading the fight against genocide that other so-called civilized countries and so-called democratic countries refuse to take on. So, I mean, you know, and we see this globally. I mean, we see this on social media every day. People cheering on Iran, cheering on Yemen, cheering on Hezbollah and Hamas, Palestinian resistance. Over and over again, these are white Westerners doing it.
And, you know, the thing also is Iran, out of the entire resistance axis, except for April 14th, they haven't actively really done, you know, like something like what Hezbollah is doing or like what the Yemenis are doing. Iran has been trying themselves to stay away from it because it's not in their benefit. It's in nobody's benefit to start a war unless your last name is Biden or Pelosi or Obama or Clinton, right? Other than that, it doesn't really, it's peace is profitable, not war.
The maximum on Iran, they can put more sanctions, but militarily nobody can do anything for Iran. And if they could do it, they would do it like 20 years ago when Afghanistan, Iraq were fully occupied by the United States.
And it's harder today because now Iran is a defender of all humanity.
Yeah, it is.
Adding regarding Netanyahu's visit to the United States, I think Netanyahu now, he doesn't want a deal. It's just like an extra time. He's like playing in an extra time just to say to the people, no, Israel wants a deal, but Hamas doesn't want. And I think he went there, had all these clubs, all this support, and I think 99% of the people think that Trump will win. And maybe when he sat with Trump told him, "We'll do whatever you want when I got elected." So we have now 4 months, 4 extra months before the elections. It will be like a very intense 4 months on Lebanon and on the Palestinians. That's what I think. And now we are still in the phase that we're waiting for the Yemeni retaliation. We'll see the Yemeni retaliation if it was like
for the purpose of data.
Yeah. If it was intercepted or do anything significant, of course, the war will continue. And we'll see where they will hit in Lebanon. So if they targeted Beirut, Sayyid Hassan said that say target Beirut, not Haifa will be targeted like in 2006, but Tel Aviv will be targeted. So after that, nobody will know, or even, I think even Sayyid Hassan and Netanyahu don't know what might happen. So we have 4 intense months until Trump wins or loses. We'll see.
is made to lose.
There's no deal. I don't think there's deal, because if I was Netanyahu and I saw all this support from the one of the greatest empires to ever exist, I would do whatever I want. And it's clear what he wants war.
By the same token, Joe Biden found himself in suddenly a lame duck presidency in the sense that there is no further presidency for him after November. We can see if he has his wits about him, if he will strike at Netanyahu hard in these interim months. Of course, nobody really expects that, but he has shown some distaste for the Israeli prime minister and his actions and how it's bound the U.S., the U.S.'s hands domestically. And if he wants to, if there's payback that he would like to deliver, this would also be an opportunity where it wouldn't have been the case if he was still running, if he was the incumbent president running in the next elections. But does Joe Biden have his wits about him? Also, in terms of the Trump presidency, a potential Trump presidency, there is the idea that Trump is very pro-Israel, extremely so, though Biden and Trump compete on who is the bigger Zionist. But, Trump, we have seen in the past, doesn't like wars in particular. He was the first president in a series of U.S. presidents who did not initiate wars, a new war, and was consistently tried to unwind wars, not for any humanitarian reasons, but he simply didn't like to pay for them.
Exactly.
He thought American money should be spent on whatever, America first, new high-rise developments in New York City, God knows what, But the point was, this is very dangerous for Israel. The Israelis never actually liked Trump.
Exactly.
So why did they not like Trump if everyone thinks Trump's such a big fat Zionist? It's because he wanted U.S. troops out of Syria, he wanted U.S. troops out of Iraq, and he didn't want to fund NATO anymore. I mean, this is a nightmare to the ears of Israelis' cabinet members today.
Recently, when I go and read in Hebrew media and their Telegram channels and their social media, they do love Trump, and they are making fun of Kamala Harris and Biden.
But Ben Gvir said it, right? Itamar Ben Gvir, he said Trump would be best for Israel.
But let's go back and see why Ben Gvir is in the cabinet. It's not because of his policy or because he's bright. It's because he was the missing link to form this cabinet.
I thought you were going to say the human missing link, uninvolved.
Could be. Yeah, he looks like Zootopia. Trump doesn't want war, and he doesn't like NATO, but both of these things don't affect currently Israel, because Israel, the war in Ukraine is more linked to the war in Syria more than how it's linked to the war in Gaza. That's one. And second,
however, let's not forget NATO opened its first ever office in
Jordan,
Amman, Jordan, just a month ago, signaling an intention to ramp up its activities and presence in West Asia. So I think NATO or Israel is not altogether, or NATO is not altogether unimportant for Israel in this context.
Remember when Biden was elected, he said he was going to, take the troops out of the region, and also, what was he going to promise? To make Saudi Arabia pay.
Yeah, currently nobody knows who is ruling the United States. Definitely it's not Biden. As Putin said, they are like a man with black tuxedos. But I think Trump might recognize Gaza as part of Israel, as he did in Fort Junan.
I 100% agree. I think people like Ben Gvir are all over Trump because they just want annexation. They've got annexation on their mind, and Trump delivered the annexation, the recognition of Israel's annexation of the Golan Heights, which nobody else recognized. Basically, it would be a violation of international law and UN Security Council resolutions. So, if you think of Smotrich and Ben Gvir and that lot, the Jewish extremist settlers in the Israeli decision-making positions, they want to grab some quick gains before the project falls apart. Because at some point they recognize, and I think they'd be perfectly good with the idea that, Tel Aviv is targeted You get a bunch of liberal Jews out of, who run away, secular Jews out of Israel, leaving Israel largely in the hands of absolutely nut job extremists like these cabinet members, like the settler movements that want to take all Palestinian territories, don't give a hoot about international law, and kill them. So these guys are thinking very differently than your average Israeli, wants to escape conflict potentially. These guys are just going for the settler ambitions.
Exactly. So there's one last thing that we should discuss this week, and it's this report from the Washington Post. It came out on Friday, if I'm not mistaken. And they do a very in-depth analysis of the use of economic sanctions by the U.S. government over the last 4 administrations, right, since the Bush years all the way up to Biden. And they come out with just some staggering numbers. The main number here being that a third of all nations in the world are facing effects from sanctions, right? Either being sanctioned directly by the U.S. government or entities within the nations are being targeted, organizations, etc. Or maybe, indirectly, like is the case with Lebanon and the Caesar Act, right? Syria's Caesar Act. And that these sanctions affects, that the nations affected, 60% of them are low-income nations. So you have, just a staggering amount of countries under sanctions, and most of them poor nations, right? Developing nations. And Joe Biden has been, they've been increasing every year a bit more. It's like the U.S. government has become addicted to economic sanctions.
And Joe Biden broke the record with 6,000 sanctions in just 2 years.
But here's just one thing. Because, why are they so obsessed with this, right? Why are they so obsessed with economic sanctions? On the one hand, it's because they're kind of easy, right? The U.S. controls the financial system. The gold reserves of almost all nations in the world are in the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. So, they can just bully nations like this, throw their weight around. But there's also a second thing that is so interesting and that they detail in this Washington Post report, because they talk that as U.S. sanctions went up, a parallel multi-billion-dollar lobbying and influence industry grew alongside it, right? So you were saying earlier, right, about Trump being anti-war, so to speak, and I'm thinking, I wouldn't call Trump anti-war. What I would think of Trump is more like he's not in on the business.
Well, he's not in on the business, but also he doesn't want to give U.S. dollars for free,
exactly.
Right?
So there's another business here, which is sanctions.
Yeah. So big American multinationals, corporations, conglomerates, all sort of started paying serious attention to the sanctions regime that the U.S. Department of Treasury had accelerated, because they realized it was an excellent potential tool to wipe out their competitors in other parts of the world.
Right.
So typically the U.S. and other countries have used tariffs, right, as a method of targeting competitors in other countries. But now it turns out there's this great little sanctions tool that U.S. corporations discovered, slap sanctions on China, but only in this industry, because they're way ahead of us in
Remember
technology. Yeah, Huawei and 5G, oh my God, they're so far ahead of us, sanctions on Huawei, and make up some justification for it.
They can't be ahead of the United States because they steal from the United States.
Oh,
Okay. I thought only United States they can.
He's being sarcastic. You have to start to recognize Karim's sarcasm face, otherwise you'll take him seriously. But how did sanctions get so completely out of hand? Now, one thing we need to recognize is, between diplomacy and war, there are a whole host of tools that foreign policy decision makers employ. Okay, but between diplomacy and war, there seems to now be only one tool in the American foreign policy kit box, and that's become sanctions. And it's grown incrementally to sort of, you go straight from, a negotiation didn't go well, to the sanctions threat, and then sanctions employed, and then it just spirals. Once you open the sanctions gateway on a nation, it becomes so much easier to just accelerate these sanctions and then you can't wind down. And taking countries and taking companies off a U.S. sanctions list is so impossible because there's so many interests trying to keep them there. But the article does kind of go to the root of this, that the sanctions explosion began after 9/11 when the Americans were looking for tools between war and diplomacy. Of course, they went straight to war. Okay, they went straight to war with no evidence whatsoever. Afghanistan, and then a year later, Iraq, but started to escalate on the sanctions front. And then Congress, okay, there's another thing. Congress got in on the act, flooding the State Department and White House with sanctions requests that in some cases appeared intended to cut off foreign competition to home state industries. So everybody's in on this, this sanctions con, right?
American way.
It's the American way. It's capitalism. But I think here's the inconvenient truth.
Yes.
Is that sanctions indirectly affect, and directly affect millions of civilians in these countries, right? 60% of the poorer countries in the world are targeted by sanctions. This makes them even poorer. How does it do that? Everything becomes dual-use technology. Like we've seen the Israelis name biscuits and chocolate as dual-use technology, banned items, and so drugs, they banned chemo drugs in Iran. That's another reason Iran expanded its civilian nuclear programs, was to be able to create drugs for cancer.
Don't forget, another big news item this week that is related to this is, of course, the Venezuelan elections, right? When Nicolás Maduro wins a third term. And a big part of the campaign was to remind the people, hey, remember that the opposition asked for these sanctions that prohibit us from importing insulin, that prohibit us from getting vaccines during COVID, that prohibit us from getting, repair parts for, dialysis machines. I don't know. Exactly, it affects the population. And then don't forget what happened in Syria, right? Last year.
Syria was really struck by power cuts. This is one of the most resource-rich countries, if not the most resource-rich country in all of Latin America in gold and oil, and it was hit by severe power cuts. So generators, electrical generators, cause serious problems. People die in silence from these diseases. And, it is a quiet mass murder that escapes the attention of
No, but what I was going to say is just remember Syria after it was hit by the earthquake, and aid agencies couldn't deliver humanitarian assistance because the U.S. refused to give a sanctions waiver. And this is a reality across the world, right? North Korea since 1950 under sanctions, Cuba since 1962, Iran since 1979, and the list just goes on and on.
Yeah, those are not U.S. adversary states. They're not U.S. competitor states. They're states that need to do business with their neighbor that the U.S. has sanctioned, but then they get hit by secondary or tertiary sanctions, which is just, it's like a never-ending sanction train that continues.
I just want to point out that all these states are the anti-Zionists, and they are all against Israel, so it's a fun fact.
Okay, but here's the thing, the U.S. sanctions explosion has its repercussions, and some of those repercussions have become very, very clear to us in recent years, certainly at the Cradle, because we see even U.S. allied countries like Egypt and Saudi Arabia and the UAE in West Asia join multipolar organizations like the BRICS and become more engaged with other multipolar organizations that are viewed as anti-American, like the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, where they attend their meetings and engage more fully each time.
Don't forget about de-dollarization as well, right? Like nations moving away from the U.S. dollar because they realize that it's being used as a weapon of war.
Yeah. So if you realize that your economy, because you actually need stuff from your neighbor that's being sanctioned by the U.S., you're an largely agricultural state. you need industrial goods, but you can't afford British ones or American ones, and you buy,
like steel or something like that.
Yeah, parts from like sanctioned countries or sanctioned industries in your region. You then start to think very carefully about reducing your exposure to the U.S. dollar and even euros, right? Getting out of euro bonds, things like this, measures that states have to are now implementing in increasingly all the time. But we saw a warning issued by Saudi Arabia at the G7 meeting earlier this month in July that Riyadh might sell its some of its European debt holdings if the G7 decides to seize almost $300 billion of Russian frozen assets.
And
and this goes to show that, it's not just the sanctions thing, but it's the weaponization of the dollar and the euro now that is a threat. But it's also this new, in between diplomacy and war and sanctions, this new tool that Western states are utilizing, which is freezing assets of anybody they want extrajudicially.
And Saudi Arabia is among some of the countries, I think China also, that have been dropping their hold of U.S. treasuries, right, of the U.S. foreign debt, known as U.S. treasuries. They're just shedding it because, they can see the forest for the trees.
But I consider the sanctions as a very, very effective tool, and it's very cheap. And it's affecting many countries, especially in our region. We have 3 countries that are highly under sanctions. We have Yemen, Ansarullah, Sana'a, and we have Iran, and we have Syria. These are affected as countries, and we have individuals or entities such as individuals that are sanctions because they have connections with the Hajj Sha'bi, the PMU in Iraq, or the Syrian government, or even Hezbollah.
Or they're just Shiite.
Yeah, 100%. I think it's very, very effective. Unfortunately, and it doesn't backfire. Yeah, now it's backfiring because Russia is sanctioned. But all this time since the 50s, it never backfired.
But to be fair, before the Ukraine war, Russia, China, Iran, and other multipolar rising powers were already contemplating alternative banking messaging systems to SWIFT and even digital currencies. This has been in the works for a good decade, at least, and I think since the BRICS exploded on the scene, that became a huge
Brazil has been trying for a while in South America to get their own currency.
Yeah, but for instance, Brazil is not a reliable country for BRICS or for the West because it's like swing state. It's a swing state, as they say. Yeah. Previously,
from Lula to Bolsonaro, back to Lula,
Yeah, but for instance, Iran, we know the policy of Iran, we know the policy of China, and these are strong states. But I don't know why they added, to be honest, Egypt and Ethiopia. These countries don't add anything, and they are like part of the West, in my eyes at least. I think that this was a big mistake for BRICS.
I don't think their calculations were the same as yours. There were reasons for these countries.
There's only one reason, Sharmeen, to say, oh, no, we have more population than the G7.
No. I do agree with
Egypt. There's just one thing you just reminded me of. Last week, there was news that they shed $14 billion of their foreign debt. Egypt, right? A country that hasn't implemented any reforms, that all of a sudden got a lot of money from IMF and the EU and the World Bank and et cetera, et cetera.
UAE.
Yeah, like, they're getting just a complete windfall.
Yeah, of course, because
they're shedding their foreign debt.
That's the money that you have to pay to make the western part of Israel safe. Most of the money that's spent in Egypt is that because Sisi want a new capital, although there's nothing wrong with the old capital.
Nothing. It's prettier. It's got more charm.
Well, I think we can stop there for this week. Thank you so much for joining us. Please make sure to like, to subscribe, to share this video, to follow us on Twitter, on X, on Instagram, and to remind you to check out our Patreon so you can become a member and help us continue with our work here at The Cradle. For The Cradle News Roundup, my name is Esteban Carrillo. I have been joined by Karim Shami and Sharmeen Narwani.